"Don't touch it, Arif. The pup will bite you." The old fruit seller shouted across the narrow alley, his voice sharp as a group of boys bent down toward the trembling creature wedged between two rusted water drums. The puppy was little, more than skin and bones, its patchy fur matted with dirt. Its eyes, however, were wild and unblinking, fixed not only on the boys but also on the battered shoe clamped tightly between its tiny paws. By midday, the alley had filled with whispers. People paused in their routines, market baskets still in hand, drawn by the strange sight. Some laughed at the absurdity, a stray puppy refusing to abandon a shoe. Others muttered superstitions, wondering if something cursed lay within. No one dared step closer. Each time a foot moved forward, the pup growled, a raw, desperate sound that was far louder than its frail body should have allowed. It was late afternoon when Zayan, a veterinary assistant known around the neighborhood for patching up injured donkeys and feeding stray cats, arrived. He crouched low, not rushing, letting the air settle between himself and the pup. "Easy now," he murmured, though his words were not meant to soothe the humans watching, but to acknowledge the animal's defiance. Zayan had seen hunger before. He had seen strays fight over scraps of bread, but this was different. This was not food. Beside him, his colleague Nadia watched carefully. "It's guarding that shoe like a cub," she whispered. Her tone was part wonder, part concern. The shoe itself was hardly recognizable, torn at the seams, its leather cracked, its laces gone. Yet the pup pressed against it as though it contained the last breath of life it needed to hold on to. Zayan tried a cautious step forward. The growl sharpened. The pup's ribs heaved as if each inhale was borrowed from pain itself. Zayan froze, then slowly set down a piece of flatbread soaked in goat's milk. The smell carried in the heavy air. For a moment, the pup's gaze wavered. Hunger battled with loyalty. Its nose twitched, but when the crowd leaned in, the pup shoved its head over the shoe and let out another low, guttural warning. The bread remained untouched. The spectators shook their heads, disappointed that the drama wasn't ending in some swift capture. One woman muttered about wasting time. Another insisted the shoe was filled with bones, perhaps from a child's cruel game. Yet Zayan saw something none of them seemed to notice. The pup's body was shaking not just from exhaustion but from a relentless need to protect. He turned to Nadia. "We can't just pull it away. Whatever's inside that shoe, it matters. To the animal, more than its own hunger." The street had begun to empty by dusk. Shadows stretched long between the leaning walls of the alley. Still, the pup did not move. Its eyelids fluttered with fatigue, yet each time its head dropped, it startled awake, pushing its weight against the shoe again. The broken leather was no shield, yet it had become something sacred to this abandoned creature. Nadia knelt beside Zayan, lowering her voice as though speaking too loudly might break the fragile scene. "If we wait much longer, it won't survive. The night, look at it. Its body can't endure another hour without water." She pressed her hands together, uneasy. "But if we force it, we risk breaking whatever trust it has in that object." Zayan studied the pup, the dark stains of grime around its nose, the raw pads of its paws, the way its frailty seemed carved into bone. He had worked with animals, long enough to recognize when they were clinging not to an object, but to a memory, a scent, or a presence invisible to human eyes. He exhaled slowly. "We'll need to take both, not the pup alone. The shoe comes too." The plan was simple but delicate. A basket lined with old cloth was placed nearby. Zayan edged forward with movements so measured they seemed part of the air itself. With one hand, he inched the bread closer. With the other, he extended the rim of the basket, not to trap, but to create an invitation. The pup's breathing rattled, its growl weakening, more a whisper now than a threat, but its paws remained clenched around the broken shoe, claws digging into the leather, as though it could anchor itself to the earth through it. At last, the collapse came. Not a surrender, but the exhaustion of a body stretched beyond survival. The pup swayed, its head falling sideways, yet even in that final slip of consciousness it dragged the shoe into the basket with it. A gasp rippled through the few who still lingered in the alley. Nadia pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes wet. Zayan lifted the basket gently, the tiny body and the broken shoe together, as inseparable as shadow and form. As he carried it toward the clinic, Nadia walked beside him in silence. She did not ask what might be hidden inside the shoe. She already knew it was not the leather or the dust that mattered, but something far more delicate, something that would reveal itself only once the safety of the clinic walls closed around them. And so the night began, with a stray pup and its broken shoe carried toward the only place left where secrets could still be honored. The clinic was quiet that evening, the dim hum of fluorescent lights the only sound as Zayan placed the basket on the steel table. Nadia locked the door behind them, shutting out the noise of the city. The pup had not stirred. Since collapsing in the alley, though its shallow breaths rasped in rhythm with the rise and fall of its frail chest. Still, even in unconsciousness, its paws clung around the broken shoe as though the leather itself held the last thread of life. Nadia wetted a cloth and dabbed gently at the pup's fur, revealing raw patches of skin and small wounds that spoke of weeks on the street. Her hands trembled, but her movements were careful, deliberate. "It's starving," she murmured, "and dehydrated. If we don't rehydrate slowly, its organs could shut down." Zayan nodded, but his gaze was fixed on the shoe. Every instinct told him there was something more than scraps of trash hidden within, something that explained the pup's unyielding devotion. He reached forward, fingers brushing the cracked leather. At once, the pup twitched, a low whimper slipping from its throat, though its eyes remained closed. Zayan froze. "Even unconscious, it won't let go," he whispered. "This isn't just protection. This is memory." Minutes turned into an hour. The pup was given drops of glucose water from a syringe, its body weak but slowly responding. Only then, when its breathing steadied, did Zayan dare to slide the shoe gently from beneath its paws. The leather peeled back with resistance, its seams frayed, the sole almost detached. As the shoe opened, a fragment of cloth spilled out, small, crumpled, and stained with the deep brown of old blood. Nadia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The fragment was unmistakable. A child's sock, worn thin, embroidered with faded cartoon shapes. Zayan's throat tightened. It wasn't the object alone. It was the scent clinging to it, faint but still alive in the fibers. To a human, it was nearly nothing. But to the pup, it must have been everything. The silence grew heavy. Nadia broke it with a whisper, her voice fragile. This pup must have belonged to a child, maybe one lost, or gone. Her words trailed into the sterile air, unfinished. The pup stirred faintly, paw stretching across the table, seeking the sock as though sensing its absence. Zayan placed it back beside the tiny body, and immediately the pup pressed into it, sighing, through cracked lips sinking back into fragile sleep. The sight cut deeper than any wound. An animal clinging not to food or safety, but to the lingering scent of someone it had lost. Zayan turned away, struggling to steady his own voice. "This isn't about survival anymore. It's about holding on to the last piece of a bond we can't see." His words trembled, carrying the weight of something more than clinical observation. Nadia stepped back, tears streaking her cheeks. She had treated countless strays, burned paws, infected wounds, broken bones, but she had never seen devotion carried in such a fragile form. She shook her head slowly. If the child is alive, someone out there has been grieving for weeks. And if not... She stopped, unable to finish, her body tightening with the ache of unsaid words. The mid-evening rain began tapping against the clinic windows, soft and persistent. Inside, the room felt smaller, the story heavier. Zayan reached for a pen and a notepad. "We need to find out where this pup came from. Someone must have seen it before. A missing report, a family asking." His voice steadied with determination, though a tremor of sorrow still lingered. As they prepared an IV line, the pup suddenly jerked awake, eyes glassy but blazing with fear. It lunged weakly forward, teeth clamping onto the sock, growling with a sound raw and broken. Its tiny body shook violently, muscles straining beyond their limits, but it would not release its grip. The image seared itself into both of their minds. an animal refusing to let the world strip away the last scent of the one it loved. The tension in the clinic rose, the hum of the lights sounding louder, the rain harder. Nadia steadied her hands against the table. We can't keep it alive without separating the sock for treatment, but if we take it, it could break its will to fight. She looked at Zayan, eyes wide and uncertain. He closed his eyes briefly, the decision slicing through him. Then we won't take it. The sock stays. We treat them both as one. If that's what gives it the strength, we honor it. The pup, exhausted by its outburst, collapsed once more, still clutching the cloth. The clinic seemed to exhale with it, though the heaviness in the air remained. Outside, thunder rolled distantly across the city. Inside, the tiny body lay curled, against the remnant of a child, bridging two worlds, one of survival and one of grief. And as the storm deepened, both Nadia and Zayan understood that this was no ordinary rescue. Whatever truth lay behind that blood-stained sock would not only change the fate of the stray, but also force them into a mystery that reached far beyond the walls of their clinic. The clinic lights hummed faintly as night pressed against the windows. The little pup had been placed on a soft blanket in the corner cage, its fragile body wrapped in warmth it had never known before. Zayan checked the drip once more, his eyes lingering on the rise and fall of its chest. Each breath was shallow, but steady enough to give him hope. And still, tucked beneath its paws, was the broken shoe. No coaxing, no attempt at gentle removal. Had succeeded. Even in feverish half-sleep, the pup's claws clung to it, dragging the leather closer each time someone reached out. Nadia leaned against the counter, exhaustion in her eyes. "We've cleaned wounds like these before," she said quietly, "but this one fights not for itself, only for that shoe. Why?" Her voice carried frustration, not for the animal but for the mystery gnawing at them both. The shoe had been scanned with cautious fingers, its seams checked. Nothing seemed hidden inside, just torn fabric, dust, and the faint lingering scent of sweat and earth. And yet, the pup protected it as though its very soul was bound within. Around midnight, a sudden whimper broke the silence. Zayan rushed to the cage, his heart tightening at the sight of the pup struggling in its sleep, paws twitching violently, jaws snapping at unseen shapes in the air. He opened the door, pressing his palm gently against its bony side. Slowly, the tension eased. The pup's nose pressed against the shoe again, as if only that object could anchor it back from nightmares. Zayan's throat tightened. He had tended to animals all his life, but never before had he seen such relentless attachment. By morning, the pup had gained a flicker of strength. Its eyes, though clouded with weariness, opened to the light. For the first time, it sniffed at the small bowl of softened food placed nearby. A fragile attempt to eat followed, though it paused constantly, glancing back at the shoe to ensure it remained untouched. Nadia crouched beside the cage, whispering, "Whatever is inside, Zayan, I think we need to open it fully. This isn't just a scrap of leather. There's something more." Zayan hesitated. "If we tear it apart, we destroy the very thing keeping it alive. What if it loses the will to fight?" His words echoed his fear, that the mystery inside might not match the pup's faith in it, and the betrayal could break what little spirit remained. Yet, as he spoke, his eyes rested on the shoe, noticing for the first time a faint bulge beneath the sole, where the leather had cracked open. With careful precision, he lifted the shoe away for the briefest of moments. The pup whimpered sharply, struggling to rise, but Nadia steadied it with soft hands, whispering words of comfort. Zayan turned the shoe under the light. Dust fell away, and with a small tug at the torn sole, something thin slipped free. At first, it looked like a scrap of paper, curled and stiff from time, but when he unfolded it, his breath caught. It was a photograph, worn at the edges, stained by rain and years of neglect. The image was faded, but the outlines were clear enough. A boy, no more than 10, crouched on the ground with a puppy cradled in his arms. The very same puppy, younger, healthier, with bright fur and trusting eyes. The shoe, it seemed, had once belonged to the boy, perhaps abandoned, perhaps lost. But the photograph had been hidden there, tucked away by hands long gone and guarded ever since by the stray. Nadia's hand flew to her mouth. This isn't just survival. It's memory. Her eyes glistened as she looked at the fragile creature before her. The pup whimpered again, pawing weakly at the shoe until Zayan returned it. The moment it touched the leather, it pressed its nose against it and grew still, as though the reunion was complete. The mid-morning sun spilled through the clinic window, warming the room, yet silence lingered heavy. Zayan turned the photograph over, hoping for a name, a clue, anything to lead them to the boy in the picture. But the back was blank. Only a crease ran across it, splitting the boy's smile into two halves. "We don't know who he is," Zayan said finally, voice low, "but this dog does, and that memory is stronger than hunger, stronger than pain." Yumo twist left them shaken. This was no ordinary rescue, no simple case of nursing a stray back to health. It was a story buried in loss, a bond between a child and an animal fractured by time but kept alive through something as unremarkable as an old shoe. The mystery was no longer whether the pup would survive, but whether they could find the thread that connected the image in the photograph to the life still fighting before them. Nadia leaned closer to the cage, tears finally falling. "We thought it was just an object, but it's a grave, a memory, and a promise all at once." The pup lifted its tired eyes, gaze unbroken, as though daring anyone to take that memory away again. And in that moment, Zayan knew their journey had only just begun. The clinic had grown quiet after nightfall, the hum of the old ceiling fan blending with the occasional bark from kennels outside. Zayan sat beside the small recovery cage, watching the pup's chest rise and fall in shallow rhythm. For hours, the shoe remained locked between its paws, even as sedation weighed down its fragile body. No force could separate them, and Zayan knew better than to try. He had learned long ago that survival often clung to symbols the world dismissed as worthless. Nadia hovered near the table, her arms crossed tightly as though bracing against a storm. "We can't keep wondering," she said finally. "Whatever is inside that shoe, it may be rotting. It could make the pup sicker." Her voice trembled with frustration, but beneath it ran a thread of fear. She had treated too many strays whose only Eegers turned out to be scraps that harmed more than healed. Zayan leaned closer to the cage, his expression unreadable. He reached in slowly, not to pull the shoe away but to feel the air around it, sensing the pup's reaction. For the first time, there was no growl. The animal stirred faintly, its head nudging forward as though granting permission. Zayan exhaled. "All right then," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "We'll look, but gently." When he eased the shoe free, the room seemed to still. The leather cracked beneath his hands, its seams so loose it barely held together. He turned it toward the light and something small slipped onto the white cloth below. Nadia stepped forward, her breath catching sharply. At first, it looked like a bundle of fibers, no more than a ragged clump of thread and fur. But as the light struck it, the truth took shape. It was another creature, so tiny it could fit in the curve of Zayan's palm. A newborn pup, lifeless yet carefully tucked inside the broken shoe, its body pressed into the leather as though cradled there for protection. Nadia pressed her hand to her mouth. Oh, God! It carried its sibling here. Her eyes shone with disbelief. It never left, because it was guarding the dead. The revelation spread through the room like a current neither of them could contain. The stray they had thought was clinging to junk had in fact been guarding the last fragment of family it had left. The broken shoe had not been a possession. It had been a coffin, a shelter, a desperate memorial carried through alleys until the pup's body could no longer endure. Zayan's throat tightened, though he forced his voice steady. This little one didn't make it, but the other, the one still breathing, it wouldn't let go. He returned the tiny body to the shoe, placing it back beside the recovering pup. Only then did the animal stir, its nose pressing faintly against the leather as if reassured. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The clinic walls seemed to hold the weight of something far heavier than silence. Nadia wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of her coat. We thought it was a mystery, a superstition, but it was just love, wasn't it? Pure and small, but stronger than hunger itself. Zayan nodded, his gaze lingering on the basket. It's more than love. It's memory, and memory is the only thing that keeps the forgotten alive. As the night deepened, the air in the clinic changed. The twist had come, not in a burst of noise or spectacle, but in the quiet revelation of devotion that defied explanation. The broken shoe no longer looked broken. In that moment, it was whole, a vessel carrying grief, loyalty, and the fragile hope that one life, at least, might still be saved. Morning crept softly into the clinic, filtering through the cracked shutters in narrow shafts of pale gold. The night had been long, filled with whispers of machines and the steady rhythm of survival, but the little stray had held on. Its breathing, once ragged and shallow, had found a fragile steadiness. The broken shoe still lay inside the cage, the lifeless sibling nestled within, and the pup rested with its muzzle pressed against the worn leather as though anchoring itself to a memory it refused to release. Zayan had not slept. He sat at the small desk, eyes fixed on the animal that had revealed a truth far larger than the alley where it was found. He had treated countless creatures, but this night was different. It wasn't only about wounds or hunger, it was about devotion so raw it reshaped the way he looked at survival itself. When Nadia entered with a flask of tea, she paused at his side. The silence between them was thick with unspoken words, yet both knew what lingered in their minds. The weight of what love can make even the weakest endure. By noon, news of the discovery had spread. A few locals who had watched the scene in the alley came timidly to the clinic. Their laughter and mockery from the previous day hung heavy now, replaced with hushed awe as they gazed at the cage. One elderly woman pressed her hands together, murmuring that she had never seen such loyalty in her lifetime. A boy who had thrown stones toward the pup lowered his eyes, guilt shadowing his face. In that cramped room, human arrogance gave way to humility, and the sight of one tiny creature guarding the dead softened something within them all. Nadia placed fresh water and a small bowl of broth inside the cage. This time, the pup lifted its head. Its ribs still jutted out like sharp ridges, its body fragile as parchment, yet its eyes carried a new clarity. It sniffed the bowl, glanced once at the shoe, and only after nudging it closer did it begin to drink. The gesture was unmistakable. Permission granted, but only with the lost sibling near. Zayan felt his chest tighten. He whispered under his breath, "Even now, it shares." The following days moved slowly, marked by fragile progress. With each feeding, the pup regained strength, though it never once let the shoe out of sight. Volunteers suggested discarding it, arguing that the sight of the dead was no good for healing, but Zayan refused. "That shoe is not death," he said firmly. "It is the reason this one survived. Take it away, and you take away its anchor." Nadia agreed, and together they made sure the shoe remained, cleaned gently but never removed. Weeks passed, and the pup's coat grew thicker, its frame filling out with muscle and vitality. Yet one truth never changed. It always returned to the shoe, curling beside it each night as though guarding the bond that had shaped its will to endure. People began to visit more often, not out of pity but out of reverence. They brought blankets, food, and donations, each wanting to be part of a story that had begun in a forgotten alley but now resonated far beyond. The pup, once seen as nothing, more than a nuisance, had become a teacher. On the evening when the sibling was finally laid to rest, Zayan chose not a burial in solitude, but a quiet ceremony under the neem tree behind the clinic. The pup was carried outside, the broken shoe placed gently beside the small grave. As soil covered the tiny body, the pup whined once, soft and mournful before settling against the shoe. Nadia bent low, whispering, "It knows, and it accepts." The final rays of sun fell across the courtyard, turning the air golden. Zayan looked around at the gathered faces, neighbors, children, strangers who had once dismissed the pup as worthless. Now they stood in silence, watching a truth too powerful to ignore. "We spend our lives searching for meaning," he said quietly, more to himself than to them. Yet this little one carried meaning all along. In its loyalty, in its grief, it showed us what most forget, that love is not measured by strength or speech, but by what you are willing to guard, even when the world sees nothing there. The crowd remained still, the moment etched in their memory, And as the sun disappeared beyond the rooftops, the stray pup curled beside its broken shoe, no longer alone, but surrounded by the quiet reverence it had earned. That night, the clinic. Lights glowed softly against the dark. Inside, a single cage held not only an animal but a story, a reminder that even in the smallest life, even in the most tattered object, there can exist a depth of love so profound it reshapes those who witness it.